food is emotional. If I don't eat, eggs, that means I can't have, the cookies that my grandma used to make when we were little.
Nobody enjoys the concept of less.
People like eating meat.
So how does eating less meat will change the temperature of the world?
So it's not just a matter of, oh, I hear information and then I go make a change.
So what happens when people that you really love and care about just don't see this issue, right? Do you dismiss them?
One of the reasons why I wanted to make this documentary is that I'm confused. I'm a guy who wants to end factory farming, and I started a nonprofit organization to help make that happen. And so many people seem seriously pissed off about it. I'm confused why it's so difficult to get people to eat less meat. I mean, there are so many alarms going off from countless scientific bodies about the problems with our food system, particularly factory farming, and yet, meat consumption continues to climb.
So at the moment, the extra carbon that we're trapping is the heat equivalent every day of about 400,000 Hiroshima-sized explosions. That's enough extra heat that we've been able to melt most of the summer sea ice in the Arctic. It's enough extra heat that the world's coral reefs are now dying at a stupendous rate. It's enough heat that cities in tropical Asia are becoming almost impossible to live in. So a fight is on to see not if we can stop global warming. At this point, it's too late for that. But to see if we can stop it short of the point where it takes out the kind of civilizations we're used to having.
Global temperatures reached extreme highs this past week.
16 rivers in North and South Carolina remain at major flood stage.
Strongest storm to hit Puerto Rico in more than 80 years.
Now the largest wildfire ever recorded in California.
More snow at the city's airport in a single day since they started keeping records.
20 to 30 million people will become climate refugees in Bangladesh by 2050.
The Greenies say raising beef contributes to global warming.
And what is the relationship between meat consumption and anthropogenic climate change?
So almost everything that a human being does in the course of a day burns some fossil fuel, releases some carbon. I mean, from the moment you get up and turn on the light or the radio or whatever it is. But one of the things that produces a fair amount is livestock. The latest estimates I've seen from the FAO and others think that if you add up everything, you may get 18–19% of the world's global warming emissions coming out of agriculture, especially out of livestock. So it's not as big, perhaps, as the drivers were sort of used to talking about, power plants and cars and things, but it's big. And obviously, it's one of those places where change is possible. You don't have to wait for someone to build an enormous wind turbine next to you. You can change what you're having for dinner tonight.
I always cared about the environment, and that became especially true in college. I was that guy on campus who told people that they should recycle, walk instead of drive, use a refillable bottle of water instead of a plastic one. And when I learned about the problems with factory farming, I was outraged. I decided that the sensible thing to do was for me to go immediately vegetarian with the aim to be fully vegan. And for the most part, that worked out, but there were some problems. I remember one Thanksgiving in particular where my dad was kind of cajoling me to have a small piece of turkey. And when I popped it in my mouth, my sister said, "I thought you were a vegetarian, Brian." They were kind of making fun of me, even though I was the only person at the table who was trying it all. And I thought, well, maybe I'm not a vegetarian, but I still cared a lot about the problems. And so my friend and I came up with the concept Reducitarian. I wanted to inspire as many people as possible to cut back on animal products, especially people who are never gonna go vegan or vegetarian.
do so could result in serious injury. In case of an emergency, listen for announcements and instructions from the crew. Please familiarize yourself with the location of life jackets on this ferry. They are located in marked lockers and bins along the cabin.
I love seeing my parents. I always, I have to practice patience, you know. It's always, when you're different people, it can be challenging sometimes, but I love them and I'm always glad to see them. I just have to always, not too many religious debates, maybe not too much politics, and then everything's okay. My dad is the happiest man alive. I don't know who dropped him as a kid or what happened, but he is just always happy. No matter what's going on, he's happy. He has faith, things will work out, everything happens for a reason. As a kid, whenever I was scared, he would say, fear is just an acronym for false evidence appearing real. He loved to tell me that whenever I was scared. But it's hard, isn't it hard to eat healthy and exercise?
No, if my life depended on it, if I ate meat, a steak, and if I thought that I would kill me right away, I would never have it. The problem is everything's a slow process. You're having that one drink doesn't kill you, you're overeating one meal doesn't kill you. It's what you do on a routine basis day in and day out that kills you. And stress is the number one, probably.
What about not what it does to our bodies, but what it does to the planet, what it does to other animals?
Yeah, I am not as much a humanitarian as I should be. I'm very concerned about you, my immediate family, my daughter, my immediate family I'm incredibly interested in, and my own health I'm interested in. I talk to people every day. I see a lot of patients, so I feel like I'm doing my service there. But people talk about the, what's it with the heat?
Global warming?
Global warming. So
that pail out there, did it work? Right. Did it work on you?
No, I guess not. So I am not that concerned about global warming, to be honest. I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm being honest with you. Everyone has a certain number of hours in the day, and I'm more concerned when I walk in the house, the temperature of the house. I'm not, I guess, a humanitarian.
Do you think it's arrogant to think that humans are changing the temperature of the planet?
Hotter or colder? Which is it? Today? No, the world is
global warming.
The world is getting hotter. This summer's been very hot here. I don't know, but in the winter I don't feel it. I think it's a joke. I don't think there's anything to it.
Why do you think that there's nothing to it?
The world has been going on for how many freaking years?
And I guess because we don't really see any proof to it.
They put up thermometers places and they measure it. The things are melting.
Like he said, the summers have gotten.
God is controlling everything.
I think actually the summer is the way the summer always is. Some summers were hotter than other summers.
Well, it's a worldwide situation. He's not talking about Staten Island.
I'm not either.
What if I told you that 99% of scientists thought that global warming was a real phenomenon and it was happening in part because of our actions on the planet? Do you think?
That's unbelievable. That's unbelievable. These people actually study that. The world is falling apart and they're worried about the temperature. Or do they think it's going to affect everything? I don't know. They're worried about the temperature. Call me crazy. I think they're spending a lot of time doing something that has not much validity. A few years from now, they'll be talking about everything's getting too cold. God is taking care of everything. He's in control. Leave it alone. Worry about what you do. Eat less meat. Don't worry about the... Oh, so eating less meat will change the temperature of the world? If everyone ate less meat, what if no one ate meat, they produce less animals, then the temperature would change? I don't get this. I got to talk to one of these PhD scientists about this.
Well, let me be the resident. What would they say? So they would say that factory farming is when you put lots of animals in these very intense environments, and you have to have all these inputs. You have to water the feed so that the feed grows. You have to feed the animals this resource. You have to butcher them, grow them. You have to ship them far distances. And through this process, there are results. And these results are greenhouse gas emissions. And these are gases that go into the atmosphere. And there's through this process, the planet heats up. And so it's the same thing when you drive a car or you go on an airplane. Everything that we do has some impact on the planet.
Well, I do think that the technology is getting out of hand, that the world is getting not better, but worse because of all the technology.
But one of these technologies is the way we raise animals for food, that we raise them with such efficiency and at such high volumes that we're spewing all of these gases into the environment.
Then which is worse, driving cars or that? Like, where do you pick? Or you do all the fields, you try to help everything. Aerosol cans, there's a problem.
Some scientists have said that factory farming produces more greenhouse gases than all of transportation combined. So if you're...
Some scientists say that.
Some scientists say
Today.
that, but all scientists agree that factory farming has a major impact on climate change.
Do these scientists eat meat? Some do, some don't.
Some do, some don't.
What do you eat? What do you eat for breakfast?
For breakfast, I either have a smoothie, which has banana, strawberries, blueberries, or I'll have avocado toast. Every millennial has avocado toast. You know about avocado toast?
I never heard of it.
Do you like avocados?
I know what avocados are, but I never heard of avocado toast.
Have you ever had an avocado?
No.
Have you ever had an avocado?
Okay, I heard of it.
Where do you go to eat?
Where do they sell this?
Everywhere. Do you eat Mexican food ever?
No.
No. The color turns me off.
Here we go.
That's green. So green.
What colors do you like in food?
I don't know.
Brown, like meat.
There's very little I can eat right now.
Can you take your finger and go like this? I believe in you. We're gonna make history. You're gonna have guacamole for the first time. Corn chips are right here.
Oh, okay.
I'll do it with you. Please take your finger. Take a scoop.
I'm not taking a scoop.
You're doing something. We have to do this.
I'll take a speck.
Take a speck. Take a speck of guacamole. Oh my goodness. Are we ready? Everybody, yeah, you're gonna get some here at the same time. All right, 1, 2, 3.
Interesting taste. I don't like it particularly much, but it's okay.
I don't like it.
The corn chip I like. This is good. The combination is okay. It kills the taste.
I think the way to think about it is if it came from the ground, it's healthy. So a tomato is a little bit better than tomato juice, unless it's just
I love
juice.
tomato. We eat a lot of tomatoes.
Tomatoes.
Well, we love tomatoes.
All right, so that's a fruit.
How about pizza? Have
We eat
tomato
a lot
sauce
of
on top?
tomatoes.
Does not qualify.
Well, I get the good tomato sauce. The sauce is
A
not
small amount of tomato sauce at the expense of a lot of white flour
They used
and
to
cheese.
they used to say pizza. This is how things change. They used to say pizza was very healthy.
The whole food, it has everything in it.
Who said that?
Scientists.
Scientists. They said pizza was very healthy.
It had
And
everything.
it had the vitamin C from the sauce, the tomatoes, and the cheese.
And the bread. It has whole food, it has everything.
And the bread. But now we know that pizza is not healthy.
We know or believe? We'll see what they say in 10 years from now.
I left my parents' house feeling sad and frustrated. I love them, and they won't do what I think is important for even their own health. It's like watching a sinking ship and not being able to do anything about it. But my parents are not alone. Just about 1 in 10 Americans gets the recommended amount of fruits and vegetables in their diet. The average American consumes over 200 pounds of meat each year. We have some of the highest rates of diet-related illnesses in the developed world. How is this possible?
You get a reward, you did a great job on your exam, we're gonna give you a nice slice of pizza. If you're good and finish up your chores, we're gonna give you 2 scoops of ice creams. No one is saying, hey, Johnny, you got an A, so I'm gonna give you some broccoli.
One of the things we know is that physicians talking to patients about changing their diet is one of the most important motivators that there is. If your doctor tells you you need to change your diet, you need to eat more healthfully, and is specific about how you're supposed to do that, you're going to take that very seriously. But doctors don't know anything about nutrition. They're not taught it in medical school. They're not even taught how to refer patients to dietitians or nutritionists to get advice about it.
There are foods that are served in schools that the American Academy of Pediatrics have labeled carcinogens. 67,000 pediatricians have come forward and said, do not serve this to children. Those are still on most menus multiple times a week.
There's marketing lobbying that is constantly conducted by the meat industry, and that distorts what people hear about, what people see. So there's layer upon layer where the meat industry does cause confusion. Consumers hear misleading information. The American public does not get a balanced view of the scientific evidence.
I mean, to explain why doctors don't know anything about nutrition is really very simple. The entire medical care system is set up to reimburse doctors for what they do, not what they prevent. I mean, if you want to look at it from a really cynical standpoint, you can ask the question, who would benefit if people ate more healthfully? What corporations, what industries, what money-making operations would benefit if people ate more healthfully?
I have a morbid fantasy, Brian, that big food, big pharma, each one, CEO smoking a big cigar in a big smoky boardroom with the door closed, strike a deal. Big food CEO's job is to make people sick and profit from it. Big pharma CEO's job is to treat the unnecessary illness and profit from it. They have a good laugh, shake hands, right? I mean, our culture runs as if that deal were actually struck that way. And, if you were sort of an extraterrestrial intelligence, you came down here and you saw a place that runs on Dunkin', everybody's drinking Coca-Cola, McDonald's sponsors the Olympics, and multicolored marshmallows are part of a complete breakfast, you would basically conclude there's no intelligent life down here.
Our society gives value to cheap meat and junk food in a way that I just can't understand. So how did we get that way? Did humans evolve eating vast amounts of meat?
So we know that our earliest ancestors in Africa, let's say more than 3 million years ago, had a diet that was probably like that of the great apes today, largely vegetarian. And then we get evidence about 2.5 million years ago of the butchery of mammal carcasses. We find bones with cut marks on them, stone tools scattered around those. So we get evidence of increasing amounts of meat eating.
If our ancestors, a group of them or just one, were walking across the savannah and then there would be, half-eaten zebra, it was a great idea to eat it. Right? It was, it was nutritious, there was lots of calories, fat in it. So once they started trying, somebody tried here, another person there, they were like, hey, it filled my stomach, right? It was good, and I didn't fall sick, most of them at least. So it was food. So that's basically why they started eating it, and they soon learned that it was caloric and nutritious and good for them.
And the assumption has been that meat eating was a critical part of our evolution in that it gave us access to a concentrated source of nutrients, which freed up energy for us to evolve a larger brain. Obviously, were opportunistic. They took what they could from the environment, and there was no single paleo diet. It was a varied diet, and at all times in the past, certainly, it would have included for humans probably some meat, but often not a lot of meat, and a lot of vegetable foods.
If you want to take a sort of a big picture approach to this, let's start with Native Americans before Europeans ever settled North America. And what you found were hunting habits that were quite cyclical. And the Native Americans would, in many ways, form semi-nomadic communities that would follow game and, certainly not hunt more than they needed to hunt.
When the Europeans ran out of land or saw that their population was growing to the point where there just wasn't going to be enough land to raise enough food for everybody, that was one of the incentives for the so-called age of exploration. That's what sent Europeans looking for new land. And when they got here, they found, always difficult to figure out how to say this, but they found what an indigenous population who were kind of defenseless, And they took advantage of that. And one of the biggest genocides in history happened as the Europeans took over this continent. They were faced with the biggest, richest, most naked patch of land that anyone had ever seen. And they just started tearing it up and farming it like mad.
And the Europeans brought domesticated animals, A, because they were not very good hunters. They didn't know the environment very well. And Europeans very strongly believed that to domesticate an animal was a sign of cultural superiority. It meant that you were in control. It meant that you had some stability in your life. So you didn't have to go diving into the woods every time you were hungry to shoot an animal. They actually saw that as being a kind of mark of, quote unquote, savagery. And back in Europe, hunting was a sport for the elite. It was a game. It's not something you wanted to be dependent on. So they domesticated animals. They did actually an extremely good job of domesticating animals and breeding animals.
We have letters and memoirs from Italian immigrants in the late 19th century. One, I think, goes back to her village, and people think she's a liar when she tells them that she eats meat 4 times a week.
You'd only have eaten the amount that the average American person eats today if you were very, very rich. Henry VIII probably would have exceeded the average American meat consumption. But if you were a middle-class person, no way would you be eating this amount.
Certainly until the early 20th century, most Americans were both producers and consumers of the food that they ate.
In 1900, something approaching half of the population still lived on farms and made their living off of agriculture. By the end of the 20th century, no more than 2% of the population lived on farms. And I think now in 2018, it's dipped under 1%.
And there's a lot of good reasons for that. Farming is an extremely difficult, unstable, mercurial way of living and making a living. And a lot of Americans, when they had an opportunity to leave the farm, left the farm.
What's different in increasing numbers in the 20th century are people who haven't the faintest idea what a farm looks like, except from the interstate highway.
So we have, if we do think about it, we have this quite pleasant image of the traditional farm that essentially is obsolete. I mean, I'm not saying that those farms don't exist at all, but they produce a tiny, tiny percentage of the animal products that we eat. So that's the disassociation I'm talking about, that either we don't think of the meat as an animal at all, or if we do think of it as an animal, we think of it as an animal that really largely comes from a different era of animal production.
We had to cede authority over the production of food to people we didn't know, to not just people, but institutions, organizations, corporations that began to produce our food. And that's when food kind of became categorized with a lot of these other goods that were being mass-produced, where the emphasis was on producing the most with the least amount of inputs and efficiency and that kind of thing.
At about the same time, for reasons that are kind of just serendipitous, the early manufacturers of antibiotics who had gone after these drugs in order to solve the worldwide ancient menace of infectious diseases discovered that if you gave antibiotics to animals that were not sick, then it would affect them in kind of mysterious ways. The first thing it did was it made them put on weight, muscle weight, meat, basically, much faster than they would have otherwise. And then they also figured out that if they gave antibiotics to animals that already seemed to be healthy, it would keep them healthy, even if you crowded a lot of animals in together. So suddenly here, these new drugs that were just kind of new on the market promised a way to make meat more cheap.
I don't want to say Americans began to care less necessarily about their food, because I mean, we're always concerned about our food, particularly the safety of our food. But it wasn't as ever present because we were not involved in the production of it. So we were more likely to just kind of eat what was made available to us.
Giving antibiotics to animals had created this whole entire new health threat, which was antibiotic resistance arising not from the misuse of antibiotics in medicine, but from misuse of antibiotics in animals that became meat. A whole new sort of strand or channel or chain of a public health threat flowing from agriculture in a way that no one had predicted.
We don't really have any sort of ethic. We don't, I mean, as a culture, we don't have any sort of ethic to manage the way we enter into this world of abundant, cheap food. And so we have a kind of sense that we can eat whatever we want to eat when we want to eat it, that that food should be cheap and that food should be safe. And those are assumptions that, for the most part, we can get away with having. And most of the time, our food is safe. Most of the time, Americans eat what they want to eat when they want to eat it. And for most of the time, it's cheap. And that all sounds great until you look at the consequences on the other end.
So within about 5 years of the first growth promoters being trialed, 500,000 pounds of antibiotics were being given to livestock in the United States. In 2015, that number was 34 million pounds.
Factory farms are poisoning people's water, they're polluting people's air, they're poisoning the ground.
Back to where I started here, it's that when the consumer is so distant from the producer makes sure that we see only what the producer wants us to see. And it's generally a very sort of happy picture. And I think one of the first things anybody who starts to actually scratch the surface of the food system realizes is that this is really not a happy picture at all. I mean, we're kind of trapped in a food system that is very, very bad for us. And it happened so quickly, really, that we're still sort of waking up to the consequences of it.
But this isn't exactly news to most people. There have been undercover slaughterhouse videos, lots of information about the pollution coming out of these farms, serious questions about the health of the food they are producing for decades. And none of it has made any difference. So I wanted to do what seemed practical. And the basic premise of my approach was simple. If we can get the average person who's eating well over 200 pounds of meat each year, most of which came from factory farms, to cut back by even a small percentage, that would make a much greater difference in terms of the number of animals spared from suffering, environmental impacts, human health issues, than getting a small number of highly committed people to go fully vegetarian or vegan. I thought I'd cracked it. It made perfect sense to me. But when I spoke about it at an animal rights conference, it didn't exactly go over well. They compared me to Donald Trump. They said it was inappropriate for me to be there, that I was watering down their message, even that I was there to co-opt their interest on behalf of the meat industry. Was I missing something? I wanted to get to the bottom of it. So the next year, I got a hotel room and I went back to have some more conversations.
Hey, Brian, thanks for doing this, for taking the time to meet you. I'm great, thank you. Great, if you could just take a seat right here.
I have found in my life that a lot of people simply don't want to go vegan. And they tell me that they would never go vegan. And where that's left me is in a position where I want to tell them something that's going to make some change in the positive direction. And so what I tell them is that meat consumption isn't an all or nothing premise. If you're not willing to go vegan, then you should simply cut back on the amount of animal products that you consume. And I'm wondering if you think that's an acceptable premise, and if not, I'd love to know why.
I don't think it's an acceptable premise to say that one should eat less meat. Because when we go to slaughterhouses and see the victims, the animal victims, every individual matters, every single one. And just like every human matters, like in human rights. And I think that we need to speak the truth. Those individual animals do not want to die. And I think there's a power in just saying that.
Animal rights activists are coming at this from a very ethical perspective, that animals have a right to live. And supporting any level of slaughter is wrong.
Even if the animals are hypothetically treated well up until that point, there's an objection to the act of killing.
Right, arguably your dog is treated really well at home. Would you feel comfortable slaughtering and eating your dog?
Well, the best way to understand carnism is through sort of a thought experiment. So just imagine you're a guest at a dinner party and you're eating a delicious beef stew. And so you decide to ask your host for the recipe. And she tells you that the secret is in the meat. You need to use 3 pounds of well-marinated golden retriever. Ooh. So your response is an example of carnism. Carnism is the invisible belief system or ideology that conditions us to eat certain animals. Carnism is why we find, cows and pigs and chickens, for example, appetizing, and the idea of eating dogs and cats and other animals that we haven't been socialized to think of as edible as disgusting.
Part of the challenge is that people feel somewhat removed from these systems. I mean, I know I grew up in Staten Island, New York. I never felt like when I walked into a supermarket, when I was purchasing pork loin or a steak or a drumstick, that I was supporting violence. For some people, that's a big leap. Can you appreciate that?
Most of us grow up and we're unaware of the impacts of our actions, and we are removed, and I think it's intentional. And so in a sense, consumers are also disempowered, and we're discouraged from thinking and paying attention. And in fact, there are systems and laws, ag laws, so that we can't see what is happening.
I think I was charged for giving water to thirsty pigs because the industry wanted us to go away. We were getting a lot of attention for doing this act of mercy. Like the videos that we had of these incidents went viral, and so the slaughterhouse industry asked drivers to call the police next time they see us giving water. And most drivers were unwilling to do this, but there was one driver, Jeff, who decided to, jump out of his cab and he said, "Don't give them water." And I said, if Jesus said, if someone is thirsty, give them water. And then he said, "They're not humans, you dumb frickin' broad." And I said, if the pigs are thirsty, they'll get water. And then he said, "I'll call the police." And I said, "What do we do? 911? Call Jesus." And I continued to give water, and he said he'd slap the bottle out of my hand, and the pigs were still coming to us, like they literally coming to the water bottle, and despite this confrontation. And then he just drove off. And then nothing happened for like 6 weeks, and then a police officer came to my home and issued a summons, and with a charge of criminal mischief, interference with property.
And did you win?
In the end, the judge said that I didn't interfere with property because the property still went to the slaughterhouse. So it wasn't a legal victory. I mean, we were hoping that the judge would make a progressive ruling on the fact that pigs are not property and that they're persons. But that wasn't the case. So my charges were dropped, but we did not make there was no legal victory in terms of the pigs. All of us in society have a duty to not look away when someone's suffering, but to come close and try to help. So the purpose of the Save movement is to change the cultural norm so that everyone sees it as natural and their duty to bear witness.
And so I don't identify as an animal rights activist, but you think it would be good for me if I participated in something like that, a vigil?
I think you would, I think you would identify as an activist after you bear witness.
Is there an opportunity for me to go to one?
We have a vigil tonight, and at Farmer John. It's in downtown LA, and they kill 4,000 pigs a day. And I invite you to come and see what impact it has on you.
I'm nervous. I think it's scary, and it's odd and weird in a way, and it's hard to imagine myself doing that. But I'd like to think about it, and maybe I'll come.
Well, think about the animals. Like, do you love animals?
I do.
Okay, so I think they want your compassionate eyes to be there, and they want your assistance. And
does it make a difference, me being there?
You're going to be a different person after you go there.
If you would have told me 5 years ago that I would be witnessing pigs on their way to get slaughtered, I would have thought you were absolutely insane.
So how it works, we have people in front of the slaughterhouse gate. Those are our gatekeepers. They are the ones responsible for stopping the trucks. The drivers will stop when they see people standing in front of the gate. Once the truck comes to a complete stop, that's when we approach with our water bottles and water sprayers and our gentle, calm voices. and we're looking for snouts. Do not start spraying or pouring water inside the truck. Look for a snout. If you don't see a snout, it's not your turn to give water.
truck is not going to stop. That truck is not going to stop. Hey, don't step up. Don't stay where you are. Stay back, guys. Water, say goodbye.
The most painful part was making dead eye contact with one of the pigs. I don't know why, but I feel like I'll never forget that look. And it's just an indescribable feeling of making eye contact with another being that is suffering, and there's nothing you can do to help them. And it's a very painful feeling. And I think anyone who is here, whether or not they're vegan or vegetarian, just if they're a decent human being, would feel the same way. And it's not right. It's not right. It's a very lonely feeling. And I think what I'm most worried about is that I'll never be the same for having gone through this experience, and that it'll just be hard to connect with others in the same way who haven't had this experience, because it's such a unique and disturbing experience that, and you know, I thought it would be similar to watching a factory farming video, but it's not. There's something about being here. The sounds of the pigs squealing are awful. I mean, they're just so painful to hear. And the smell, it smells awful. And it's just so pathetic, too. I mean, these animals are putting out their snouts through these holes just to find a little bit of water. And the whole thing is just so pathetic. It's sad, it's awful. And I don't know what the answer is moving forward, but I know that this is not the way. This is not the way, it just doesn't make sense. I mean, look at this. Look at this smiling, happy pig with a fucking baseball hat on. I mean, it's just ridiculous. And where are the trees? You know, we're in the middle of fucking nowhere. And it's just in the middle of nowhere. And it's fucking audacious because the slaughterhouse is right here. And so to have this mural that depicts something that's so joyous and happy is so devious and frustrating.
That experience definitely made me feel a lot more sympathetic to the activists that protested me. If everyone could see what I'd seen here, would that be enough to end factory farming?
I think a mistake that a lot of activists tend to make is that it's just a simple matter of information. That if people just knew, how animals were treated on factory farms, or how much, excess beef production is destroying the environment, or even that saturated fat is harmful for our hearts, that people would just switch from eating meats to plants. It's that simple. Provide information. But what that fails to take into account is the incredible, powerful role that the environment and marketing plays, and that the environment that people live in every day shapes their everyday food choices.
There are problems with factory farms that everybody knows about, but nobody's doing anything about them because of the pressure to keep the cost of food as low as possible.
So it's not just a matter of, I hear information and then I go make a change. If every single day, the first thing they see when they walk out the door is a McDonald's or a Burger King or a Dunkin' Donuts or a Baskin Robbins, why wouldn't they eat there? It's right there, it's convenient, it's cheap, and it tastes good. And those are the three most powerful drivers of food choices: taste, price, and convenience.
Do I think factory farms are a good thing? No. I've seen them. I don't want to eat that way. I'm in a very privileged position to be able to make that decision. Not everybody is. And I'm careful about what I advocate for, because if it raises the cost, if eliminating factory farms raise the cost of food beyond which most people in the country could afford, that would not be a good thing. And so there are trade-offs here that are complicated. And I don't think the issues are black and white. I think there are a lot of grays.
Do these food access issues affect different populations differently? Does it matter what race you are or how wealthy you have in terms of access to fruits and vegetables?
I believe it does. I believe depending on where you live, your zip code determines the quality of fruits and vegetables you're going to receive. Far too many quality stores and supermarkets really don't believe that inner city communities would like that quality of food. That's why you don't see a Whole Foods in Brownsville. You'll see it in Park Slope.
So 23.5 million Americans live in what are called food deserts. It means that you're about 2 miles away from a supermarket. And that's an interesting statistic to hear, but how that translates is that the things that are around you and available for you to eat most easily are fast food places and liquor stores. So these are environments where it's really hard to get tomatoes and avocados. Like, you and I may feel it may feel natural for us to just I'm gonna have an apple, or I'm gonna make this smoothie that includes bananas, etc. But there are places where it's hard to get the ingredients for a healthy life. And there's usually triple the death rates from preventable disease.
We cannot continue to allow the affluent areas of our country to have the best quality fresh fruits and vegetables. And then in the inner cities, we have just the opposite.
In South LA, there are 1.3 million residents, and there are only 60 grocery stores. So we are in South LA right now. If you're on the west side, there are maybe 660,000 people, and there are 57 grocery stores. Usually in a more affluent area, there's double the amount of grocery stores as in a less affluent area.
The Brownsvilles, the south side of Chicago, the Liberty City of Miami, the Compton of California, they should have the quality food just as some of the prestigious area of the country.
So the thing that we do is we make fresh food affordable in places where it's hard to find and hard to afford. So every week we do pop-ups of organic produce affordably. We accept EBT, and we do education to show people how to use the food as well. So the big thing is just making fresh food affordable to the people who need it most in the places that need it most.
If we don't do that, then we are using food as an apartheid system that will not allow those inner cities to have quality food. They can't have junk food while affluent areas have whole food. That is not the way America should be.
I'm a really creative person, and there are a lot of things that I think that I'm capable of doing. And sometimes I get upset that this is even a problem. I think something as simple as food, it's kind of like, I'm young, like I'm 27, and you look around at the planet you've inherited, and you see some of the things going on, and you're like, how did humans even mess this up? You know what I mean? Like, it's really simple. Fruits and vegetables should be around. We've been growing food for thousands of years. How do we get to the point where there's all these resources available to us and we're in a perfect position to be able to feed everyone and there's not food for people?
This is terrible. Getting people to eat more veggies and less meat seems impossible. There are all these forces at play that make the default choice a meaty one. But what if we could provide an alternative meat, one that doesn't come from a factory farm? What options are out there? Is there a meaningful difference between a factory farm and an ideal farm, or more generally, a non-factory farm?
There's a significant difference between a factory farm and a higher welfare certified farm. And to be clear, higher welfare certified is a broad term, and there's a spectrum underneath that. And there are 3 certifications that we believe are meaningful and offer a significant improvement for farm animals' lives above a factory farming situation, both because they set standards that are appropriate for animals' physical and natural and emotional needs, but also because there's a level of transparency and accountability that just doesn't exist in factory farming. In fact, it characterizes factory farming to have nobody looking at these animals and to have the complete freedom to do whatever they want.
So, for example, Thanksgiving is coming up, and I've been wrestling with this discomfort because on the one hand, I would prefer it be a plant-based meal, and on the other hand, I don't believe I can force people to do exactly what I want. And it hadn't even occurred to me that I could perhaps work with that person or even provide a turkey that did not come from a factory farm, but came from another source.
You got to get to White Oak.
What's White Oak?
White Oak Farms is a pretty incredible farm down in Bluffton, Georgia, where they raise at least 7 species out on pasture. They are certified humane, Global Animal Partnership Step 5, I believe, and animal welfare approved. They have every certification under the sun. And while it still involves an animal dying, if there's going to be a turkey on the table, I believe it's very important, especially around a holiday when people are really thinking carefully about the food, to center that meal on, certainly plant-based food to the extent that you can, but also on animals that lived a decent life.
Well, there's still time. We may have to turn this into a Portlandia episode where I go visit White Oak's farm.
When you're a 63-year-old Southern rancher and you talk like this, people want to put you in a box, politically and socially. And, I don't fit in the box. I'm a Second Amendment guy with a gay daughter that you better not fuck with.
Absolutely not in general, but especially with those in the background.
There you go.
I won't.
Yeah. So today, White Oak Pastures, my farm, is focused on animal welfare, regenerative land management, and the rural revival of this little community. And you can't have one without the other. I was very successful financially, raising cattle industrially. We lived very comfortably. We had no debt, and we paid taxes every year. My view on animal welfare during that era was, if you keep the animal well-fed, plenty of good clean water, within a comfortable temperature range, and safe from predation, and you don't intentionally inflict pain and suffering on it, that's good animal welfare. You can't do any better than that, except it's not. You know, we during the era that we industrialized animal production, by we, I mean my father's generation and mine, we were so focused on efficiency and lowering cost of production that we came to ignore the fact that animals need to be able to express instinctive behavior. You know, chickens need to scratch and peck. Cows need to roam and graze. Hogs need to root and wallow. It's in them.
And so you think of their lives as being net positive, that they're living happy.
Well, they're able to express instinctive behavior. I mean, that's what's important. You know, we feed them. There's feed in those feeders, a non-GMO grain mix. We feed non-GMO grain to our pigs and poultry. We do not feed grain at all to our ruminants. That's cows, sheep, and goats. They eat forage only.
Do they each have different personalities? Can you kind of sense that in them?
Well, you know, we probably got 2,000 pigs, okay. So you know, it would be disingenuous for me to say that I know all of them and they have names. That's not. We manage, and you see that he's not been castrated. So his testicles in the back. We don't no physical alterations. We don't cut teeth or claws or. I tell people we used to castrate everything born on this farm that wasn't named Harris, and now we don't cut anything. You know, I have the peer-reviewed, third-party ecological work done on this farm showing that my holistic management system using animal impact has actually benefited this land dramatically over the last 20 years in terms of organic matter, in terms of water holding capacity, in terms of microbial activity.
And they seem happy. You know, I think of my dog, Toby. We live in a somewhat small apartment. Toby spends most of her life in the apartment, and we take her for walks. But here, you know, the pigs get to be free.
That's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up.
Tell me.
So, you know, your exposure to animal relationships is limited to, what's that dog name?
Toby.
Toby. That one relationship with Toby, or whoever came before Toby and whoever goes after Toby. And that's, when you think about animals and people, you think about you and Toby. For me, my relationship with animals is so complex. I have livestock, like these pigs, and I love them in a certain way. I have work animals, like my horse and my guardian dogs and my herding dogs, and I love them in a different way. I got a companion dog, Judge, who you met earlier. I love him like you love Toby. Same relationship. I got wildlife on this farm that I love in a very different way. These microbes in the soil I love in a very different way. So I am unapologetic about the fact that I allow these animals to breed naturally. We grow them in a manner that is very humane and allows them to express all their instinctive behavior. And we choose when to slaughter them. But when we do slaughter them, we do it ourselves in our own farm plant. You know, these animals have never been hauled anywhere. They've walked everywhere they've ever been. They walk right up there and be slaughtered in that plant. Dr. Temple Grandin, do you know that name?
I do. Tell us about her.
Dr. Grandin, who I know personally, is the inarguable expert internationally on humane animal handling and slaughter. We differ on some little points, but she knows more than I do. And she designed that plant to be as humane as possible. And I've unfortunately been with people when they died of old age or some malady or an injury. I'm happy to take you up there and let you see these animals being slaughtered. When I go, I hope I go like that. I believe that my animals lose their life in a much more humane way than anything I've ever seen die outside that slaughterhouse.
And that was the one hard part for me was I have been outside of a slaughterhouse. We were waiting for pigs that were in trucks to be, and I think they had come from a very far distance. And I was with animal activists who were spraying water into the trucks because
they needed it.
They need it and they're thirsty. And so that's currently my only reference for...
Well, let's go in here. Now, you can film in here anywhere except the actual slaughter. You can go in there, but it's just not respectful to the animal to film that. But you can see it. Anybody can see it.
Sure.
But you can film anything except that. Well, that's the only only area where there's not full transparency, and there's transparency there. It's just not it just doesn't seem right to me.
I understand.
I don't want you to film me when I'm defecating.
Neither do I'm not a pretty person when that happens either, so
yeah.
I can appreciate that.
Just everybody deserves a little bit of dignity and respect. So this is the kill floor, and these guys are bringing the live animals from those holding pens into this box right here. Said Blair's going to step up. He's going to dispatch the animal with the captive bolt. That's a device that drives a steel rod into the area where the sensory receptors are. It does not kill the animal, but the animal physiologists tell us that it renders them senseless. And I hope that's true. I have no way of knowing, but I do know that when they are put down with the captive bolt, you can touch the eye and there's no reflex, no vocalization. They're still respirating, heart still beating, but we are told and we hope they feel no pain, and I believe that based on my observation of it. After he dispatches them with the captive bolt, he'll bring them up by the back foot, and then he'll plunge a knife into the heart, and the animal actually dies of cardiac arrest because it's evacuated all the blood. It is death, but having seen people die from injury I feel like it's probably a more humane death than any person I've ever been with.
Do you wish that all Americans had the opportunity to see this so that they understood what was involved?
Despite the fact I just said that it takes an unhealthy person to enjoy watching slaughter, I think everybody ought to see it. And I'm very proud of what we do here. I think that this is the best possible system for this not pleasant task. How you doing?
And the reason that factory farms won't let us see the process of their slaughtering is because it's so awful and horrific?
Well, you'd have to ask them. I mean, that would be my supposition, but I can't speak for them. I take solace in the fact that I believe that the animals are dispatched as painlessly and without fear as possible. And I think that it's part of life. That was the captive bolt.
Truthfully, I wasn't entirely comfortable with all that I had seen in the slaughterhouse, but I have to hand it to Will for even letting me take a camera in there. Still, I had a bigger question. In the same country that eats $110 billion worth of fast food each year, where 1 in 8 people eat fast food every single day, and where most people buy factory farm meat in supermarkets, would it really work to replace those industrial farms with farms like this? Would people pay more? Maybe if we are really to end factory farming, we'll need an easier solution.
People like eating meat. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about the vegan world is how much the vegan world wants artificial meats. They miss it. That's weird to me. I don't understand that. You know, I think you can eat a perfectly adequate diet and never eat meat at all. I don't see anything wrong with that. But why have to have artificial meats? I don't understand it.
So we did this study with the University of Michigan. So they did a life cycle analysis of our entire production process, including the supply chain, and came back with some absolutely startling statistics about the environmental impact of what we're doing, better than I thought they would be. And so water is a great example. We use 99% less water than a conventional beef burger. That just shocked me, you know, and then 93% less land. And this is where I got to pause for a second, because we think about the American farmer, and you think about, they have, let's say, 100 acres. If they can produce the same amount of burgers, right, with only 7 acres, they have 93% of their land, or 93 additional acres to do something else with their earned income with, right? But then if you look at climate, you know, the emissions that we're producing are 90% less in terms of greenhouse gas emissions than the emissions from a conventional burger. And lastly, energy, we use about half the amount of energy. So it's pretty impactful.
This is going to be the biggest extinction in history. We're going to be losing all sorts of species over the next 50 years. It's absolutely frightening. And so we have to start thinking about that. We have to become responsible. As leaders in the food industry, we have to start taking responsibility for our actions, for the food that we put out. And the food that we create has to invite people, entice people, inspire people to eat a better diet.
Food is emotional. Like, it's so tied to culture. You know, I'm Mexican. You know, we grew up eating the very iconic dishes, right? That oftentimes have cheese or eggs or meat as a core part of that dish. And so it's very, I think it's difficult for most people, because when you tell them to eat something differently, it's like they're making a trade-off, right? That, okay, if I don't eat, eggs, that means I can't have, the cookies that my grandma used to make when we were little, when we were growing up. So in the same way that brewers use yeast to convert sugar into alcohol to make beer and wine, or the way that bakers use yeast to convert sugar into carbon dioxide to leaven bread, yeast can also convert that same sugar, but into protein. And so we are able to produce proteins, like egg proteins, to be able to replace eggs and other ingredients in those kinds of products.
Because meat is so intricate, the process of building it from plants is pretty complex. It starts with a canvas, and that canvas for us is the structure of the protein. And so we create that platform or that canvas by stitching together the protein that we get from plants into the structure of muscle, roughly, from the human sensory perspective. And so we begin with that canvas, which is the structure of the protein. Then you have to think about, well, how do I make the flavor and aroma of meat, which is so intimate to humans and our relationship with meat. It's so familiar to us. And once we identify those, we then try to match those in plants. And we try to find analogous molecules in plants and then bring them together in a way that with heating and with the release of aroma and the release of flavor, they communicate to the human sensory experience in the same way that those molecules would in animal protein.
So what do you think about plant-based meats, or increasingly the idea of cultured meat?
Lab-based artificial meats are off my radar. They're artificial. And so I'm not interested. I'd rather eat meat from an animal that was raised under the best possible conditions. And that meat is available to somebody like me who has enough money to pay for it.
As a public health physician whose job has always been human health, I've reached the conclusion that if we don't deal with the impact we're having on the planet, every other aspect of human health is moot. There are no healthy people on an uninhabitable planet.
Is there a difference between cell-based meat and conventional meat?
At the cell level, when you look at it, it will be the same. Except that, since we control everything about the environment that the cell is in, we can make it better. So there's only so much that you can manipulate an animal to give you a better tasting meat, because an animal hasn't evolved to give you tasty meat. It's evolved to keep itself healthy and to proliferate its own genes. In our case, we're able to control the entire environment the cell is in. So the pH, the dissolved oxygen, the temperature, etc. We control all the amino acids, fatty acids, salts, minerals, things like that go into the cell, and then everything that comes out of the cell, which means we can make the food, the cell, taste better and be healthier than anything that's already out there. And of course, it'll be more sustainable as well.
What is that?
So this is the flask where the cells are on. You can't see them with your naked eye, but there's a ton of cells in the bottom of this. And this is the media here. This red liquid is all the nutrients that cells need to grow, to proliferate, to move around. And this flask is just a surface for them to grow on.
Last July, we went and visited a pig in Marin, which is just north of San Francisco. And we took a very small biopsy from the pig, live pig. She ran off into the farmyard. So we came back here to Indy Bio, where our labs are, and we take those cells and we begin to multiply them. So we proliferate the cells. And so that took a few weeks. And then you have a certain mass of cells, and then you separate them and you induce them into muscle and fat. And then at that point, you can combine them together and you essentially have ground meat, in our case, ground pork or minced pork. And then we took that and we made sausages with them.
I don't think people they're used to thinking about meat in terms of eating cells.
So yeah, I think actually if you ask people, what do you think about chemicals, right? They think chemicals are bad, but everything is chemicals, right? You, me, the air.
Right.
Food is chemicals. Like if it's not chemicals, it's not matter. So the same thing with a lot of cells, right? People might think cells are bad, but we're made of cells. Our food's made of cells. Apples, meat, almost anything we eat is made of cells.
I know some people are skeptical about cell-based fish in that to them it resonates as a processed food. I mean, you can understand, do we really want to have our food come from a lab, they might say?
I used to be a beer seller. It's like a sommelier, but for beer. It's called a cicerone. And I've been on a million brewery tours, and on any given brewery tour, you can find somewhere in the brewery a place where you've got scientists in white lab coats doing experiments. And what they're doing is like figuring out new flavors and new ways to make different types of beer. But then that beer is produced in a brewery, and that's not called lab-grown beer. Our process is similar. We do our research in a laboratory and then our production in a facility. And so if we're like lab-grown fish, they're lab-grown beer. And in fact, most snacks that anybody eats are tested and prototyped in a lab and then produced in a facility. So if, like chips aren't lab-grown chips, we're not lab-grown anything either.
The insulin protein used to come from pigs. In order for a diabetic to get their insulin, you had to kill a pig, extract the insulin from their pancreas, purify it, and inject it into people. And that's how every diabetic got their insulin protein from prior to the 1980s. And you needed over 51,000 pigs to make 1 kilo of insulin. So it's incredibly inefficient technology to make this very functional, useful protein for the world. Fast forward to today, almost all insulin is made using fermentation.
Basically anything you can think of or find online about like 3D printing organs, that also is applicable to this field. Because basically what we're doing is 3D printing organs. Just instead of trying to get more and more detailed to make something more and more functional, we just need it to be much cheaper and much faster.
It strikes me as I'm speaking to you that we're talking so much about how the products are made, but when I think about conventional animal products, I never really thought about how those are made, and when I think about it, I'm not particularly happy. And I don't think most consumers really understand how we go from a cow to, let's say, a steak. It may just be that if these products exist and they're delicious and they're affordable, that people will just eat them, and they're not going to even bother to care about what feels like fancy words to me, like a bioreactor or scaffolding or cell lines and so on.
Yeah, I really agree with that. We're not going to take, any effort to conceal what we're doing. We're not going to hide it. We really want it to be available, but it doesn't seem like people are that interested in how their food is made. And so I don't think we're going to lean on this as messaging when we, bring this to the public. It's interesting, like we're, often asked like exactly how this process works, and people really, really want to know, but they never seem to ask how their actual food right now is made, and they don't really seem very interested in that. I feel like if we have like all of this, in-depth coverage of exactly what we do, why do they have ag-gag laws? Why are we not allowed to film inside of the places that they actually produce food? It seems like an unequal playing field.
I've seen conflicting data around the environmental footprint of cell-based meat. Why is there so much confusion about that? And is there really confusion?
Are you referring to the very recent study that came out this week? So that study in particular looked at the environmental effect of cell culture meat on climate change on a 1,000-year horizon. 1,000 years. Our method of producing meat is very highly reliant on energy, and they use an energy system which is reliant on fossil fuels. So in their study, they say energy comes from fossil fuels, which emits a tremendous amount of CO2.
All of human society right now is predicated on the idea that we'll be off of fossil fuels within a decade or two. And so a lot of the cell-based meat industry, in terms of it being like good for the environment, is very much predicated on the idea that we're going to be off of fossil fuels. But what's great about it is that it's giving us the potential to do that. Because right now, especially with land animals like cows, there isn't a method. So it's like if you're using them, we can try and reduce, but we're never actually going to hit a point where we can just use clean energy to power a cow. Whereas this, you can.
More people have gone to the moon than have tried this. Amazing. It tastes just like chicken.
Yeah. I love everybody's first reaction to it. There's like a little bit of a surprise shock on how good it actually tastes. We're always still trying to work on it. We're texturally we still think we can continue to improve it, but the flavor profile is fantastic.
It tastes really good, and I know it's very simple to say that it just tastes like chicken, but it really does.
That's the best compliment we can get. That means that we're doing it.
You will see the quick-serve restaurant industry transition in this direction in a way that's really significant. You're seeing it with Carl's Jr., and they've been amazing partners, and A&W in Canada, they've been absolutely outstanding. Their businesses are booming with respect to these sales. So they're seeing that, and you'll see the rest of the industry come along. I think that there's very little reason to continue to use animal protein in a fast food setting. I mean, it's really about the whole experience, and we can provide plant-based meat that provides every bit of satisfaction to the consumer in those settings.
What I'm hearing is a theme of meeting people where they are, because I would love it if my parents, for example, ate a vegetable on occasion.
Right.
But if they're going to be making a decision around meat, I would rather them have a plant-based meat, like Beyond Meat, than have meat from a factory farm. And that's the sense that I'm getting from you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's all about, so what happens with people that you really love and care about just don't see this issue, right? Do you dismiss them? Do you circle the wagons and say, I'm only gonna hang with people who think just like me? Or do you, as you say, meet people where they are?
Not long after this, something I had never expected to happen, happened. So I feel like a lot has changed since the last time we were at a table and talked about our
25
diets.
pounds have vanished into thin air. That's one thing. It really is amazing.
How did it happen?
The whole key is health. People should be concerned about their own health. It's critical, because especially as you get older. When you're younger, you could get away with it.
So what would you say to someone who was like
Don't be a
you?
schmuck.
But you were a schmuck a couple of years
Absolutely.
ago. So what do you? It's amazing. I feel very hopeful for the first time. It's incredible.
That's funny. So how do you get people to change? I thought I was in good health. That's the amazing thing.
That's what I don't understand. How could you think that? If you were slightly
a person could
overweight,
think
you
they're
had
rich,
type
and then
2
they win the lottery.
diabetes.
It's all, you get used to a certain thing. I guess I was healthier than a lot of my friends. I still felt okay.
Okay.
But I was 40 pounds overweight. And looking back, I used to get tired. I thought it was normal as you get older that you get tired. I feel better now at 67, almost 68
But what did
than
you
I did
do?
at 40.
So what's happened since you look thinner?
Thinner. First of all, when you're thinner, you have more energy. It's like carrying around the bowling ball. I don't know how I did it all those years, but you get used to it. You don't know the difference. I even think clearer.
Well, but what happened?
Changing my diet changed my life.
What did you do?
So I gradually ate less meat. That's the essence of it. And when you eat less meat, you eat more vegetables. It was a process. I don't say the first time I tried a bowl of broccoli, it seemed maybe it's the green part, it seemed boring. But then I got to look forward to it. You have to be ready for things, I think. And once you get small results, it's really it's energizing. Then you do more and more. It's really cool.
I don't know what will end factory farming. There are a lot of smart people who have come up with some good solutions, but each one seems to have its own pros and cons. Plant-based meat doesn't yet taste exactly like animal-based meat. Cell-based meat is at least a couple years away from being on the market, let alone at a price the average consumer can afford. And there are a lot of questions about regenerative agriculture and whether it can live up to its environmental promise while meeting current demands. What I do know is that just about everybody agrees that we should be eating far more plants. And in order for there to be a world without factory farms, there needs to be less demand for meat, way less. Anyone who can must make an honest effort to cut back on the amount of animal products that they consume. We can't give up on the possibility that we can make things better, even when it feels agonizingly slow. I mean, if my dad can make a shift in this direction, anybody can. We're running out of time, and I believe that every effort, no matter how small, will count in the end.
I'll take you swimming, follow me. Nighttime where there is none for the sea. I'll keep on living incomplete as long as I still wake up from my dreams. Never see the end of our own stream. We don't make time where there is none. Move your feet. I'll build you a boat out of lightning and fill it with pearls. We'll float world's end and touch it, return just to prove the impossible possible. Sure, you'll be there when our time comes. You feel the same thing, we're waiting and waiting, and stop our few flames.